have to apologize to Ronnie. I have been known to harass him on occasion, just on occasion. And he came over in all clear conscience while I was sitting over here visiting, asking to confirm what the scripture was. By the time he left, he didn't know what end of the Bible he was supposed to go to read. That was my fault. I apologize. That was my bad. He did a great job, though, and I appreciate his service in that. Just as a side note, many of you may not know, they're not aware, but my brother David, where I sit beside him, David Singleton, he sings the fine tenor, and I sit right beside him, and then right across the aisle, Pete sings tenor, and then I heard a tenor back there, I think Daniel possibly, but I'm going to miss having David sit beside me singing tenor. For those of you that don't know, his kids have kind of made arrangements for he and Annie. Gets Annie closer to them and much more easily cared for where they're going. Still concerned about where the shop's going, I know. He's got a lot of shop. But he's going to be moving to Lomita, and this is his last Sunday with us. He's going to be over there now. I made him promise he's going to try to come back and visit once in a while, and I'm going to go try to visit him. But anyway, David didn't make any big ado about it. I just thought it would be appropriate to make the comment because he has been a servant in this church, and he is departing in the same way that he served, just behind the curtain, very unobtrusive, but he's always there when you need something. I know many times when someone wasn't able to make the assembly, they'd go up and say, "Hey, David, can you do?" And he said, "Yeah." He's always available. Appreciate his servant mentality and the spirit of service that he gives us. We're going to be missing him as he travels on in his life. He and Annie will have to keep Annie particularly in our prayers. I looked at the title. In fact, it was Ronnie and I was giving him a hard time about the scripture. I set the title up because I had intended originally for this sermon to be rather sarcastic. And not that I would ever be sarcastic, but I thought, you know, you could go at it from a sarcastic way and point out the negative of what this scriptures teach positively. And instead I thought, in spite of the sermon title, How to Please Men, our goal is to please God. And so I'm going to confront it from that way and not go the negative of how everything that would be the opposite would be pleasing men. And so I want to look at this from the viewpoint that Paul is giving. He had mentioned the fact that he had a rough time in Philippi. We mentioned that this morning as a sermon that came from the letter he wrote them. After Philippi, he left and went to Thessalonica. And everybody, evidently, they had a great news service, kind of like the Hamilton Herald News. They got the word out, and so everybody in Thessalonica knew what went on in Philippi. And they knew the struggles that he went through. And when he came to them, he opens and closes an idea in this context here in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. In the beginning, for you yourselves know. That's how he introduces this thought. And then he closes it down with verse 9, where he says, for you remember, brethren. So what he is talking about are things or events that transpired that they are familiar with, and what he is using is his life and the events in which he was involved in order to teach them how they ought to be. And it's interesting to me that in teaching how you ought to be, it had a relationship socially with those around them. And so originally my lesson was how to please men by doing everything the opposite of Paul, what he said here. But what I'm going to do is just switch that around and say, you know, how we ought to please God may please men if they love God, but if they don't, it's not going to please men, and we need to be aware of that. But here are some things about which he said we need to incorporate in our lives if we're going to please God and not please men. And I believe the focus of the lesson needs to be on the end game. Who are we with our actions and with our speech and our conduct, our service? Who are we really trying to please? Is it me? Is it someone else with what they can do for me? Or really, are we trying to please God? And here's a formula for it. It's presented in a negative and a positive way. And so when you begin with what he's trying to do, he said, when I came to you in verse 4, we spoke in a manner in which we were not pleasing men, but God. Now the reason he gives for that is because the effort to please men is void and vain by virtue of the fact we won't be judged by what somebody else thinks about us. And that's basically what this is saying. I mean, we do, as a social creature, have concerns about those about us and what they think of us. I understand that. It's a natural phenomenon as a social person. It matters what you think of me, and it matters what I think of you. And so that's a natural thing. However, when it comes to things right and things eternal, it doesn't matter what you think of me or what I think of you. What matters is what does God think of us. And so therefore, the way he taught was always focused on what's going to please God. That's first. That's foremost. And so here are some negatives that he uses, and this is where I would have previously, and being sarcastic, say, well, this is what you need to do if you want to please men. Well, let me reverse that, and let me rethink that and say, let's view this as it's presented in the text. Here's how we please God. Neither at any time did we use flattering words. I understand, being a speech miser and trying to use, I love, manipulating words. I do that a lot. I came across one here the other day that I thought, just off the top of my head, and I was thinking about I've always talked about people who don't know their Old Testament. When you say Habakkuk, they think you sneeze. Okay, well, I found another one kind of like that I wanted to use somewhere. And it's about that little short girl, Maya. She's about knee high. Her name's Maya. Those kind of things, really don't express flattering words to people. When they don't understand where books of the Bible are in the Old Testament like that, that's not expressing anything flattering. The point he's trying to make here, neither at any time do we use flattering words. Sometimes you can say words that are smooth and cute and pretty, and lots of people like that, and I understand that. But if the focus is pleasing God, the question we have to ask ourselves is that the approach I want to make if their soul is at stake? Because he's talking to some Thessalonians here who have become Christians, and he wants to have them to be more mature. So how do I go about helping you mature? Do I flatter you? I understand we always want somebody to tell us, oh, that's a great job. I appreciate the fact that encouragement has got its place in the saints, in the body of the saints. But I also understand that if the motivation is just to make somebody feel good, it's false. It's not good. It's not going to be productive. And it doesn't really help anybody to always accentuate the positive. I've heard that phrase before, and I thought about it for a while and said, yeah, on occasion that might be used, but not always. If that were the case, Jesus would never have said all the things he did in Matthew 23. Flattering words are never appropriate. When you can tell the truth to someone and it's good, please go out of your way. Gratitude's one way to do that. Thanking people for what they did. But after a while, people figure out, in fact, when you go up and tell somebody, oh, you look good today. I've had people say, well, what, I looked ugly yesterday when you saw me? Well, no. But if you're saying that all the time, somehow the sincerity kind of drips a little and falls off the glass. At some point in time, there has to be consistency in human conversation where people can count on what you say to be a truth. And that's what we're looking at. Paul said, I didn't use flattering words. The second one he points out here, I didn't use flattering words. I didn't use the cloak of covetousness. That is such a neat, generic term. A cloak, which implies some deceptiveness that's going on. The true reason for whatever's being done or said is not really out there and observable, or not obvious at first, perhaps. But the cloak of covetousness. Covetousness has to do with the fact that I want something. And covetousness is not just the desire for something. Sometimes our desires for things are good. We should desire to be stronger Christians. Coveting, very often, though, has a negative connotation with it that means it's going to get there whether it matters to you or not, whether it hurts you or not, whether you benefit or not. I want that, and so I'm going to take it. And so, therefore, we don't teach people or tell people things because the benefit ultimately is for us. That is a wrong motivation. And Paul said, if you want to be pleasing to God, that's not the way to do that. You cannot have a cloak of covetousness. And by the way, I love the phrase that he throws in there, almost as a parenthetic, an afterthought. God is witness. Yeah, I may not catch it when you say what you say to me, but God does. I know when I say something to someone else what I'm saying, and I know what my motivations are. And whether you might not know it or not, and it might get me what I want, God knows. It's not like we're slipping by Him and getting something by. Just because we get it by each other doesn't mean we got it by God. God is with us. And Paul was telling them, this is the way I did you guys. I didn't flatter you. I didn't go on about telling him how great you were when you're not. I didn't do it because it had some gain for myself. And third, he says in the next verse, excuse me, nor did we seek the glory from men. I'm not looking to be perceived by someone as better than who I am because of what I'm saying. I'm not building myself up. I'm not putting myself on a pedestal. You know, a lot of folk do that when they begin to tell people, even about Christ. And I've seen it happen, and I can understand why some people get a negative impact of Christians. And they make the assertion, right or wrong, that you just think you know everything. You know, I've heard that before. You just think you know everything. And of course, the proper response would be, no, I do not. There is no doubt in my mind, it shouldn't be in yours, I do not know everything. However, we need to clarify, because I do not know everything does not mean I do not know some things. John's epistles are full of, particularly 1 John, the fact that we can know some things. In fact, in the Gospel of John, we can know the truth. Okay? That doesn't mean we know everything, but we can know the truth. And so therefore, when I speak and when you speak and when we talk to those about us, we need to convey somewhere along the line how much we love their soul and how much this isn't my message. These are not my rules. This church doesn't belong to me. This is a body that belongs to Christ, that follows Christ because He has all authority. Now, on the positive side of things, here's what He did do. And these are things that I can't speak for anyone else, but these are things I think deserve more thought, and they're harder, I think, than the negatives. We were gentle among you. The fact is, it's interesting, and various translations translate differently. The King James talks about a nurse. The term technically is talking about a nursing mother, someone who has such great love that they cherish their own children. No real conscientious, sane mother hates their child. They love their children. And that being the case, we have a standard to be set for us. When we speak to others, we need to be gentle. That's always been tough for an individual who is blunt and straightforward. I'm one of them. I've always been very straightforward. I even appreciate that in others. And I know that's hard to believe for some, because some just don't like anything straightforward and blunt. They much like it, you know, with, what is it, a little bit of honey will gather bees quicker than vinegar, or something to that effect. I understand that saying. I appreciate that. But I like people that are straightforward. I relate to you just one incident. A rancher in Jacksboro, really neat guy, but he was known for his bluntness. And he was so blunt, in fact, that most in the church struggled to have a social relationship with him because he was so blunt. He and I hit it off immediately, and one of the deacons, a good friend of mine, said, how in the world do you get along with him so well? I said, I know where he stands. In fact, on one occasion, I asked him if I could, he had given me access to one of his properties to go shoot. He said, you can go do this. And so I asked him one time, well, can I do this? And he looked at me and he said, no. I said, okay. And I went on. That was it. No. His wife heard it, chewed him out, said, you were so mean to the preacher. And he went, I don't understand that. He was okay with it, and I was, not a problem. Some people can't relate to that kind of forwardness. We need to be gentle when we talk to each other. And I would say gentle by the definition of the reception, not the person. And I have to do that myself. I school myself on that. Some folks need it more gently than others, and that depends on to whom you are talking. I can take it blunt, but that's not fair to have everybody follow the way I take things. That's not right. We're thankful they broke the mold when they made Jeff. No more of him. Everybody is different, and therefore when I am talking about being gentle, my struggle and my striving is toward being gentle to those whose concept of gentle in their minds is built up a certain way. And I need to be aware of that. And so that's what Paul said. I was gentle like a mama does with her kids. And mamas can be very gentle, although mom could thump really hard. So sometimes there was a time not to be gentle with your kids, but we are gentle like we would be with our kids. Further, he said, I was affectionately longing for you. There's a phrase there that's used that kind of tells us Paul is looking out for them. It's a follow-up from being gentle, but it's more the internal processing of how we're going to be with others. We want them, or we want the best for them. And so therefore what we do when we say something or we do something or try to influence them is for the best of their end game, where they're going to heaven. And so therefore he was affectionately longing for them. And then he tells them further, and last of all, they had become dear to him. I don't know how long he was in Thessalonica. There's several commentators that theorize, but it doesn't take long sometimes to get to know people and get to caring for them and loving them and them being important in your life. Well, in this case here, he says, you became dear to us. Now, I don't know how many different epistles that Paul would write where he had a relationship like he did with the Philippians. You know that was a close one. Every remembrance, we talked about it this morning, every remembrance of them was a positive thing. I don't know whether they could say that with the Thessalonians. I don't know whether they could say that to the Colossians or the Galatians or any of the others that he wrote, but certainly it is the case that as you get to know each other and as you concern yourself with going to heaven, the people with whom you travel become more and more dear the longer down the road you travel together. If it is the case, the longer you've known someone, the less affected you are with them, the less friendly you feel toward them, something's wrong with that relationship. I don't know about you, but when we get to heaven, you will not be able to find a corner to hide from. I'll find you. We're all going to be there. All of us in a place where we love each other and we care about each other. And that starts now. So when we speak to people, that's the way we need to envision it. That's how we need to visualize why and the purpose for speaking to someone. Now, what the conclusion of this, of course, is in verses 1 and verse 9. And that is, the only way people will experience this is if you show this in your life. And so that's the lesson for the evening or the afternoon. Are you showing in your life the fact that you care and love for people so much that you're not going to flatter them, you're not going to do anything for personal benefit, you're out to have them go to heaven with you. And that's the kind of intercommunication that you want to have with people. That's the kind of interpersonalized relationships we ought to be having with people in this community so that we can convince them they ought to go to heaven too. That's what Paul did when he hit Thessalonica, and it went uphill from there. Okay? We need to imitate Paul in these regards. We need to become more straightforward, pure in our speech, gentle, though it's straightforward. But we need to look at people as though you're going to go with me to heaven. And that being the case, that's what's going to be the focus of how I communicate with you and what I tell you. Okay? If you're not a Christian tonight, most everybody I think here is. Still, if you're not living the way you should, invitation song, just a reminder that the door is always open with Christ. If there's things you need to change in your life, please let us encourage you to do that as we stand and sing.